And make no mistake, Ronna McDaniel is such a person. What she did was contemptible. It was appalling. She betrayed this country as badly as Trump did, and it ought to be called out. The fact that she's being paid $300,000 a year by NBC News to lie to its audience, to try to interpret this nonsense and tell them that down is up and up is down is wrong. This is the warning. Chuck Todd is a person I've known for a very long time. And he is a person, in my view, in estimation, with outstanding character and journalistic integrity. Chuck Todd's the real deal. He always has been. I'm going to show you what Chuck Todd said on the Meet the Press panel after the interview. And Chuck Todd is exactly right when he said to Kristen Welker that the president of the network, Rebecca Blumenstein, owes her an apology, as does the executive who's in charge of Meet the Press, Carrie Budoff Brown, who I suggest will not be involved too much longer with Meet the Press or with NBC News. But put that aside.
Let me deal with the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
I think our bosses owe you an apology for putting you in this situation, because I don't know what to believe. She is now a paid contributor by NBC News. So I have no idea whether any answer she gave to you was because she didn't want to mess up her contract.
Chuck Todd is about to say something important, extremely important. It's about journalistic ethics. What he says right now is probably one of the most important things that anybody said in the last 20 years about American journalism. And he did it impromptu. And he did it from a place of conviction. I have another prediction. I think what Chuck Todd said is really going to hit home, not just in the NBC newsroom, but across the halls of American journalism and in the executive suites, because he's exactly right. And there have been occasions in American journalism where the leaders of journalism, people like Chuck Todd, have said important things at moments of grave crisis within journalism about its preservation. Edward R. Murrow was such a person. He did it in 1958 when he gave an address warning about where television could lead, the frivolousness that it could inspire. But Chuck Todd is not frivolous today. Chuck Todd is deep today.
So she has credibility issues that she still has to deal with.
Yeah.
Is she speaking for herself, or is she speaking on behalf of who's paying her? Once at the RNC, she did say that, hey, I'm speaking for the party. I get that. That's part of the job. So what about here? I will say this. I think your interview did a good job of exposing, I think, many of the contradictions. And look, there's a reason why there's a lot of journalists at NBC News uncomfortable with this, because many of our professional dealings with the RNC over the last 6 years have been met with gaslighting, have been met with character assassination. So that's where you begin here. And so when NBC made the decision to give her NBC News' credibility, you got to ask yourself, what does she bring NBC News? And when we make deals like this, and I've been at this company a long time, you're doing it for access to audience. Sometimes it's access to an individual, and we can have a journalistic ethics debate about that. And I'm willing to have that debate. And if you told me we were hiring her as a technical advisor to the Republican convention, I think that would be certainly defensible. If you told me we're talking to her, but let's see how she does in some interviews and maybe vet her with actual journalists inside the network, see if it's a two-way, what she can bring the network. So I do think, unfortunately, this interview is always going to be looked through the prism of who is she speaking for.
Chuck Todd was a longtime steward of the Meet the Press franchise. It's a tough job. You get criticism. But the one thing Chuck Todd never did was gaslight his audience. And he would never allow for it to happen. And neither would David Gregory. And neither will Kristen Welker. and neither will Tim Russert. So why then would the bosses of NBC require that their journalists sit down next to a liar? Sit down next to somebody who incited an insurrection. Somebody who continued to lie and gaslight right through the program today. The only difference, she switched teams. What it is that she admitted today and would have been received as such in any court of law is that if you pay me, I'll say whatever you want. What is she? A ventriloquist dummy? Now with the fascist hand up her back to interpret what it is that Donald Trump really means? We live in a sick era. I think a lot of people understand that. This was a bad day. Imposed on Kristen Welker directly by the leadership of the company that she works for. And in the end, because you saw good journalism today and an assertion of conviction, something remarkable happened. Chuck Todd had guts, and he sat on NBC News and he spoke to the executives of the company where he's worked for a very long time, fearlessly. He didn't seem to care about any consequences or any retribution.
I think you did everything you could do. You got put into an impossible situation, booking this interview, and then all of a sudden the rugs pull out from under you. You find out she's being paid to show up. It's unfortunate for this program, but I am glad you did the best that you could.
You know what? You didn't trust Chuck Todd. You didn't put that in the bank. You learned that about him today. And you learned how disgusted the real journalists are at NBC by this decision. This decision that won't stand. Because the truth still matters. And its defense still matters. If you want to understand where the front line in this war between freedom and fascism is, it's out in that thin space, in the murky atmosphere, where the truth and the lie are indistinguishable. And Chuck Todd helped reel that back with some of the most brilliant commentary by a journalist that has ever been asserted in the history of Meet the Press. At the exact moment it needed to be said, it was said. Good for you, Chuck Todd. Good for you. Thank you for listening to my political commentary. If you like what you heard today, please also consider subscribing to The Warning daily newsletter on Substack. Our democracy hangs in the balance. The 2024 presidential election is the most consequential in America's history. It's not hyperbole, it's a fact. That is why the mission of The Warning with Steve Schmidt is to help readers orient to the currents that are shaping our times and the unseen forces driving politics that are very rarely discussed on cable news. Please sign up at Steve Schmidt, SteveSchmidt.substack.com. Again, SteveSchmidt.substack.com, or at the link in the show notes section below. Thank you to each and every one of you for listening and watching.